The age of piracy, a time when the high seas were peppered with eccentric bands of rogue mariners set on commandeering more than just a cup of joe. It was an era during the 17th and early 18th centuries, affectionately known, by those of us bemused at history, as the Golden Age of Piracy. Now, before you imagine a life packed with swashbuckling, plundering and catchy sea shanties sung with reckless abandonment, let me assure you, it was probably more akin to an overly zealous camping trip that never ended, complete with suspect hygiene and perpetual seasickness. Pirate life, my dear drowsy listener, was not all buried treasure and parrots with personality disorders. Imagine waking up each day to the gentle, repetitive lapping of waves against the hull of your charmingly creaky ship. But this day might begin with the scent of breakfast wafting up from the gallant galley below, where your enthusiastic chef, but mostly just another pirate rotated to cooking duty, has yet again prepared you a bowl of porridge. Perhaps they'd call it a stew for variety, using the same 3 corn kernels and bits of questionable mystery dried meat, savored like the gourmet meal it most definitely was not. Life aboard a pirate ship was an oddly democratic affair. Each crew member had a vote, and decisions were made collectively, rather like a very salty version of a cooperative board game. Cash was counted and distributed according to the pirate code, an actual set of rules harsher than an old sea dog's sneer. Captain and crew were equals, at least more or less, and no one ate the last biscuit without a lively debate lest he fancied a plank walk before noon. Speaking of captains, our time-traveling gaze falls upon the dashing, if not slightly unkempt archetype of a pirate captain, Blackbeard. There he stands, a thorn in the side of the British crown, with a reputation as fierce as his beard was flamboyant, entwined with slow-burning fuses that smoked ominously during battle. One might wonder if his choice in beard accessories was more a product of nautical creativity, or if he simply hoped to disguise the smell of the high seas. After all, maritime hygiene was as elusive as a mermaid sighting. By this point, perhaps you're pondering how one exactly ended up adopting the pirate career path. Was there some sort of orientation or pirate prospectus handed out? Not quite. The life of a lawless, thrill-seeking buccaneer wasn't merely a career choice, but often a last resort for sailors down on their luck. Picture the tales of young, debt-ridden sailors who chose life on the high seas over a traditional, yet financially strapped, career path. As you snuggle deeper into your quilts, let's imagine, for a moment, those starry nights. There you are on deck, gazing up at skies so clear you could make out every twinkling constellation, assuming, of course, your eyes weren't stinging from salt spray. The moon, luminescent and full, served as both nightly companion and eerie illumination for your ship's silent glide across the Caribbean. The life of a pirate, one could say, was like a never-ending quest for both freedom and, curiously, a slightly fresher source of drinking water than was usually available. While thrills and shenanigans were abundant, it was often the little things, a shared joke, warm feet at night, or an unexpectedly satisfying bowl of porridge, that tethered the spirit. As we fasten the sails of nostalgia and drift ever so lightly towards dreamland, remember that pirates were history's unapologetic rebels, marching, or perhaps sailing, to the beat of their own sea drums, in a world that was as treacherous as it was boundless. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, snuggle in, because soon we'll venture into deeper waters with tales both stormy and serene, softly illuminating the pathways of a pirate's tumultuous yet oddly endearing life. Ahoy, dear, sleepy wanderer, to a time when life smelled of salty seas and mischievous plots, a time when the piratiest of pirates roamed the high seas in search of treasure, adventure, and a decent dermatologist. For life as a pirate in the Golden Age of Piracy was not all swashbuckling bravado and fashionable eye patches, despite what popular belief and certain over-romanticized theme parks might want us to assume. Now, as you drift into the creaking timbers of our floating story, envision yourself aboard a ship, a mighty vessel with sails billowing like the chests of particularly proud seagulls. It's the 17th century, and as a budding pirate, you're embarking on a typical day that involves significantly less actual sailing than one might think. You see, much of pirate life was spent waiting for that perfect gust to nudge you towards your next prize, or merely waiting for your ship to stop. Well, creaking. Our tale begins in the Caribbean, a region as infamous for its magnificent vistas as for its, shall we say, enthusiastic mosquito population. Imagine rolling out of your hammock in the storeroom-turned-sleeping quarters with only a couple of coils of rope and possibly a barrel of rum to keep you company. It's a cozy arrangement if slightly on the liquid side. After an invigorating splash of sea spray, which serves as your morning shower, seawater is known to have rejuvenating properties for both the stubbornly unwashed and the thoroughly uninterested. You assemble with your comrades for breakfast. Our breakfast, the most important meal of the day, if it were actually available. Typically, a pirate breakfast might involve a hardtack biscuit, famously resilient against time, taste, and most dental work. Throw in some salted meat and perhaps a smattering of whatever fruit hasn't yet fermented into a pirate-approved beverage, and you'll find yourself primed to seize the day, along with anything else less heavily guarded. Set the scene. Overhead, a seagull chirps, its dirty white plumage glowing in the golden morning light. Somewhere on the horizon, an unfortunate merchant ship sails blissfully unaware of the marauding hospitality about to be bestowed upon it. As you go about your pirate chores, or as they're more enticingly titled, swab the deck with inspirational vigor, you overhear the tantalizing gossip of the sea, a proposed daring raid on said merchant vessel, tales of vast riches, exotic spices, and possibly some imported cheeses ignite imaginations. One must not underestimate the persuasive power of a well-timed brie. Amidst this swirl of anticipation, let's pause to appreciate the social epicenter of any piratical enterprise, the ship's captain. Not merely a figurehead wielding a cool hat and an enigmatic squint, a pirate captain had the lofty duties of planning, negotiating plundering strategies, and ensuring that his precariously loyal crew didn't mistake him for a walking plank. In return, he enjoyed the perks of a slightly larger portion of loot, and perhaps a less cramped hammock, once the plunderers had retired for the night. Tell me, what listless soul could forget the Articles of Agreement, or Pirate Code, the unwritten, or rather, oft-revised, rulebook? Democracy was surprisingly valued among pirates. Captains were indeed elected by crew vote, contrary to the mainstream management of chaos one might expect. Such gallant bylaws, promising fair shares and rigorous chain-of-command discussions were, frequently disputed, but conjured a certain egalitarian charm on candlelit nights. As the day wears on, that eager anticipation blossoms into action as our pirate crew, rejuvenated by visions of gold and seafood omelettes, prepares to engage with the hapless merchant ship ahead, singing bawdy sea shanties with gusto. Because what is piracy without a soundtrack worthy of a jaunty jig? You scour the horizon, ever hopeful for a successful haul or a clap of thunder from the famously unpredictable skies. Yet here, as your mind drifts softly on the tender breeze of anticipation in the glow of the setting sun, let your eyelids grow heavy with the gentle rocking of this old ship of dreams. As the sky deepens into indigo and the stars wink conspiratorially, we prepare to press onward to new mysteries of the high seas in due time. Until then, rest easy, ye sleepy seafarer, knowing that the adventure, endless though it seems, shall find its course like the moonlit tide, in the midst of the golden age of piracy, a time when the mere sight of a tattered Jolly Roger would send seasoned sea captains reaching for their brown pants. There existed a curious breed of entrepreneurs known as pirates. Now, before you conjure images of Captain Hook hanging out with Jack Sparrow, let's calm the waters a bit. Actual piracy was more about long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of chaos, a little like working in customer service. Let's imagine for a moment you're aboard a pirate ship, the Black Sheeple, a notorious vessel known not for its fearsome reputation, but more for its peculiar crew. Picture waking to the gentle rock of the ocean, the creaking wood like a lullaby, if lullabies were written by Mother Nature herself. You can smell the salty breeze as it dances through the tangle of ropes and sails above you, while your fellow buccaneers engage in a chorus of snores that could lull even the most stubborn night owl to sleep. On this particular morning, Captain Soggybeard, known across the 7 seas for the unusual talent of consistently having a damp chin, gathered his crew. "Men," he belted, though his voice was more of a croaky whisper on account of his annual pirate laryngitis. "We're not just here for plundering and looking intimidating. Nay, we are performers in the grand theatre of the ocean." You see, being a pirate wasn't just about treasure. It was a peculiar lifestyle choice that promised excitement, adventure, and an impressive variety of vitamin deficiencies. The crew of the Black Sheeple had razor-sharp wit and a mighty set of sea legs, but each had also mastered the art of creative negotiation. This was demonstrated one breezy afternoon when trading fresh coconuts with a rather confused merchant vessel was deemed a better course of action than the traditional, and let's be honest, much riskier cannonball diplomacy. When the time did come for more traditional piracy, organization was paramount. Responsibilities aboard the ship were distributed according to skill and whim. First mate, One-Eyed Willie, ironically, had perfect vision but insisted his nickname be respected. He was in charge of the spreadsheet, or rather, the meticulous log of loot written on the back of a soggy napkin. His attention to detail was the envy of scallywags, from Tortuga to St. Kitts. Meanwhile, navigating these pirate-infested waters, quite literally, was helmsman No-Nose Ned, whose lack of olfactory function was a distinct advantage in an environment where personal hygiene was not exactly a priority. Ned had an uncanny way with the compass and maps, often charting courses through the island chains with the ease of someone simply swiping left or right on a very complex dating app. Let's not forget the culinary genius in the rum-stocked kitchen, Cookie the Crab, who lived up to his name more in the crustacean-inspired moodiness rather than any actual shedding of exoskeleton. He had perfected sea biscuit parfait and could grill a salted pork like nobody's business. Ensuring no one literally jumped ship from scurvy-induced madness was challenging, but Cookie had a flair for adding a twist of citrus, vitamin C they'd later learn, into the daily gruel. Day-to-day life aboard the Black Sheeple was a blend of routine and spontaneity. The crew regularly engaged in such intense activities as napping contests and the eternal pursuit of the perfect argh. But it wasn't all parrots and grog. Time was taken in contemplation of the stars, using them as guides to navigate their futures. This, never failing to remind you of the magical way sailors learned the night sky, creating cosmic maps long before GPS was even a glint in anyone's eye. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, setting the water alight with hues of orange and pink, you prepared for another night at sea. Sure, being a pirate wasn't the glamorous lifestyle tales might promise, more like a rogue marathon carried out in takers, lulls, and surprises. Still, as the ship rocked gently, swaying you into a dreamscape of adventure and fortune, you couldn't help but feel that the true treasure was perhaps, just perhaps, the journey. In the distance, the hoot of an owl, or perhaps a slightly confused parrot encouraging everyone to see you check if it was midnight, suggested it was time to rest and ready oneself for whatever the waves might bring with the rise of the dawn. In the soft glow of moonlight, illuminating the quiet ripples of the Caribbean Sea, the clinking of cutlasses and tankards aboard a pirate ship was a lullaby, a symphony of misplaced chaos. You see, aboard these wooden fortresses of freedom and mischief, life was not always about looting and plundering, or swabbing the decks while trying not to take an accidental swim, courtesy of a rogue wave. Pirates, after all, needed to eat, sleep, and engage in the age-old act of not completely irritating each other every waking moment. If there was one character who knew how to navigate the practical annoyances of pirate life with a dash of cunning and humor, it was the ship's cook. The cook, often a former sailor or someone who unwisely commented on the captain's navigational skills, wielded a ladle with the same flair as a sword. Their domain was the galley, a space comparable in size to a generously large closet, perfect for those with a fear of open spaces. There, amidst the clatter of pots and the aroma of whatever didn't qualify as hardtack surprise, they performed culinary magic. Imagine conjuring meals from ship rations that could only aspire to the nutritional value of a boot sole. Indeed, a pirate's diet often consisted of salted beef, dried peas, and the sailor's eternal nemesis, weevils. Lots and lots of weevils. Yet it wasn't all grim fare. When possible, fresh provisions like tropical fruits and the occasional turtle stew, enjoyed by fewer turtles undoubtedly, were added to the menu. And let us not forget the grog, a mix of rum, water, and spices. Some theorists claim the dubious drink was intended to keep the crew hydrated and scurvy-free. But really, it was just a way to make daily life slightly more tolerable when your bed doubled as a storage compartment. The pirates' cabins, albeit cramped and with the approximate comfort level of a sardine tin, were a saving grace at the end of a bustling day. Hammocks, swinging gently with the ship's rhythm, provided a surprisingly comfortable way to sleep, or to accidentally discover gravity while dozing. Privacy wasn't much of an option, much like in today's loft apartments. Laughter, snoring, and possibly an impromptu sea shanty or two could be heard reverberating through the planks. Amidst these cozy quarters, pirates forged friendships that were sometimes as reliable as a fair wind, though also as fickle as a compass made of chocolate. The camaraderie aboard was fueled by an understanding that in the middle of the ocean, far from the prying eyes of law and sensibility, they were united by a common goal, sometimes treasure, more often survival, and always the mutual aspiration to not mutiny after a few too many games of dice. These sea vagabonds took great pleasure in entertaining themselves. Card games were a favorite pastime, allowing one to lose both gold and a questionable amount of dignity in a single hand. And let us not forget storytelling. Tales spun with the finesse of a practiced sailor's knot, embroidering the night with wild beasts, mythical creatures, and adventures both improbable and impossible. No pirate worth their salt would admit to getting lost, but in these tales, they could transform a wrong turn at Tortuga into an epic odyssey featuring an imaginary kraken or an unusually aggressive shoal of fish. Every pirate ship was its own isolated little world, where daily survival was equal parts skill, luck, and the occasional profitable misunderstanding with the British Navy. Life on the seas was like an ongoing opera, with episodes of comic relief and interludes of reflective solitude, where a pirate might ponder the vastness of the ocean, and why exactly they agreed to this lifestyle over becoming a moderately successful street performer in Bristol. And so, as the twilight sky reflected gentle, our waves blending into the horizon with a soft sigh, the pirates also prepared for sleep, their thoughts wandering into the night, perhaps dreaming of elusive treasures just beyond their reach, or of tomorrow's adventures yet unknown. In this quiet maritime ballet, they drifted into slumber, swaying in their hammocks under the gentle watch of stars, each a distant reminder of the world's infinite possibilities. Softly, silently, the sea carried them, and their dreams, into a night that promised both rest and the slow, inevitable approach of the dawn. Ahoy, dear listener, cast your mind adrift to the swirling cerulean seas of the Caribbean in the 17th century. Picture yourself as a bold, daring pirate in the Golden Age of Piracy. Don't worry, there's no dress code here. Just imagine standing on the deck of your trusty ship, the wind ruffling through your unruly hair, eyes squinting against the dastardly brilliant sun, with the faint smell of the ocean and adventure forever entwined. But wait, before you go swashbuckling into sleep's embrace, there is a more pressing matter: the culinary delights, or lack thereof, aboard a pirate ship. For you see, pirate grub wasn't exactly Michelin star material. Imagine dining in a five-star restaurant. Now erase that from your mind and replace it with sturdy wooden bowls and spoons of questionable cleanliness. Mealtimes weren't about sitting around a table with a crisp white tablecloth or even fresh bread. Pirates sustained themselves on salted meat that might be better suited for use as a buoyant life preserver. This was, more often than not, accompanied by a side of hardtack, which was not just a fancy cracker, but more a subtly flavored plank of despair. Rumor has it that some pirates used hardtack as makeshift weapons during particularly tense negotiations. And there was the infamous pirate beverage of choice, grog. Grog was the sustenance of champions, or perhaps a cunning distraction from the mealtime horrors. This traditional concoction was a spirited mix of rum, water, lime juice and sugar, which, when consumed, opened the doors to a world of both merriment and inevitable scurvy prevention. It also ensured that any unwanted culinary critique was kept blissfully at bay, courtesy of its liver-tingling effects. Now you might wonder why pirates even bothered to stay at sea with such questionable kitchen fare. Well, dear listener, imagine the excitement of the prize. Yes, treasure, glittering gold doubloons, and exotic riches danced in their dreams, promising indulgences like salted butter or non-scurvied limes upon the next shore leave. Amidst the culinary tribulations, pirate camaraderie shone like a beacon. They toasted their victories together and shared heartwarming and often exaggerated tales over what the cooks might have optimistically called stew. Perhaps nowhere else in history did men and women bound by sea and purpose find such unique camaraderie, fostered through shared hardship and, of course, a healthy amount of grog-induced laughter. But let us not overlook the illustrious and often confusing hierarchy on board. It wasn't just a free-for-all with parrots and patches. At the top of the nautical food chain was the elusive captain. Unlike modern hierarchy-fed stereotypes, pirate captains were not usually self-made tyrants. They were elected by their crew, a true testament to pirate democracy. One could imagine the campaign promises involved. No more mouldy biscuits in 1702. Then there were the quartermasters, who were slightly less glamorous, but crucial. They maintained order, divided booty fairly, and most importantly, ensured the ship didn't dissolve into chaos faster than you could say Davy Jones' locker. They also had the delightful duty of ensuring no one overindulged in grog, lest their swashbuckling skills become too swashed. Indeed, life as a pirate danced to its own rhythm between the whimsical, the rough seas, and the great adventure that lay beyond the horizon. It was a life draped with conditions that taught the genuine appreciation for the simple joys, such as the sound of waves against the prow and a fresh breeze cutting through the humidity of the doldrums. As the night sky unfolds its velvet cloak above, filled with stars shimmering like scattered treasure upon the ocean floor, let this tale of pirate cuisine and camaraderie gently rock you into dreams. Listen to the echoes of laughter and the clinking of mugs as you prepare yourself for your next chapter of adventure and dream-laden tales upon these storied seas, as the moon cast its silvery glow over the restless seas, leaving trails of shimmering light like scattered breadcrumbs for lost sailors. Our intrepid pirates found themselves tangled in a perilous dance between the art of navigation and the unpredictable whims of the wind. Picture, if you will, a gang of determined misfits sewing up dreams with threadbare sails and heartfelt oaths to make Mother Nature blush with envy. Oh, the seafaring life. Now, in the Golden Age of Piracy, navigating the high seas was less about maps and compasses and more about a merry mixture of guesswork and good fortune, a bit like assembling flat-pack furniture without an instruction manual. Our plucky protagonists were artisans of adventure with a well-honed ability to swear in 5 languages and an unsteady grasp of architectural angles. Each morning, as dawn cracked open the sky's treasure chest of colors, Captain Rumbeard, a man whose navigational skills were matched only by his proclivities for strong drink and tall tales, would emerge from his quarters with a map that looked like it had been created by someone who had never seen the ocean or perhaps had taken artistic liberties with coastlines. These charts were charmingly worn, dog-eared from years of salty fingers pointing to nowhere in particular. The pirates, with a keen eye for adventure and an equally firm love for their own skins, would gather around the worn wooden table. As they studied the map, which seemed to suggest a route via outer space rather than any earthly ocean, the crew bantered in tones that hovered between hopefulness and resignation. Clyde, the one-eyed cook with a nose for spices and sarcasm, often quipped that they sailed more by the stars in their eyes than those in the sky. In fact, stars played a significant role in these wandering souls' nightly routines. As the ship navigated the vast expanse, the night watch would peer through cobbled-together telescopes fashioned from old rum bottles and stray bits of glass. They didn't exactly align with the principles of Copernicus, but they did serve well enough for squinting through the night sky, hoping to spot constellations peppered across this twinkling blanket of darkness. Orion the Hunter was a favorite, often sworn to resemble the ill-fated pirate Roberts, lest they cross paths in some celestial duel. Somewhere between swatting flies and fending off another swashbuckling seagull invasion, Sarah, the navigator's apprentice, would weave through the crew's hopeful chatter. With an air of calm pragmatism, she consulted her favorite celestial bodies, and by sheer virtue of optimism and that peculiar brand of pirate intrepidity, whispered direction to her cohorts like a seafaring whisperer of secrets. While others doubted her skill given her young age, Sarah's gift was that of fierce intuition and the uncanny knack for daydreaming into reality. The nights were tactfully won by a mixture of salty air and storytelling, tales swapped like rare trinkets among those who might not see another sunrise. Storytelling was a sport on these vessels of fortune, and every pirate worth their salt had at least one tale of encounters with mermaids, and possibly even mere kittens if the rum was especially potent that night. How often did land greet their eyes at dawn? Enough times to cheer in unison against the endless tides, but also enough to remind them how small they were beneath the yawning sky. A lovely, humbling perspective for those for whom fortune was as transient as a breeze. Life aboard a pirate ship was a gentle chaos, a beautiful tapestry of conflicting ambitions and shared dreams, woven into each innocent mistake turned triumphant adventure. So tonight, as you drift off amid these reverberations of another era, remember our daring pirates and their celestial map of dreams that held them forever in twilight wanderlust. As the ocean gently rocks the ship to sleep, we look forward to our next encounter as the ever-turning tide leads us unfathomably onward, like that forgotten treasure slipping just out of reach. But dear listener, that tale is for another night as the wheel of adventure spins again on the morrow. Ah, the seven seas, an endless expanse of blue mystery and wild adventure, especially during the Golden Age of Piracy, when the term freedom came wrapped in the questionable aroma of rum and gunpowder. Speaking of rum, dear listeners, let's descend upon the intriguing culinary customs of the pirates, which may provide both belly laughs and belly aches. Grab your virtual tankards as we explore this rather unglamorous aspect of pirate life that somehow binds the swashbuckling lore with an everyday dose of hardship and a hint of humor. Pirate cuisine was hardly the stuff of culinary legend. In fact, it was more of an endurance test for even the hardiest sea dogs. Picture this: crusty biscuits, solid as the concept of mutiny itself, lovingly referred to as hardtack. One would literally have to knock them against the table, or perhaps a fellow pirate's head, to see if they were fit for consumption. Those who experienced them could swear they tasted every bit like the ship's deck, sans the charm. For protein, our legendary buccaneers dined on salted meat because nothing says high seas adventure quite like beef jerky that may have voyaged from a previous achy century. Imagine, if you will, a culinary artifact that aspires to challenge your dental work while leaving a lingering doubt about its previous life. And there were precious few ways to gussy it up, unless, of course, maggots sauntered in to add a little extra protein punch, turning your snack into an impromptu protein shake. Yet despite such deprivations, pirates were arguably the ancestors of that fashionable eating concept we now call proteins on the go. Life on the pirate's galley wasn't all flotsam and whimsy, though. Enter grog, the pirate hydrator of legend. Ah, grog. Quintessentially, it was a mix of water and rum, the beverage that flowed more commonly than the tide. Sailors had to be careful with their rationing, lest this potent potable become more of a weapon of dizziness than of mealtime delight. A sip too much, and you might be waking up to find yourself promoted to the position of figurehead, literally, tied to the mast and pointing the way to adventure, or at least laughingstock status. There is genuine admiration to be had for the pirates' ingenuity in crafting meals that managed to subvert monotony. Their diet might have been basic, but necessity spurred creativity. Take, for instance, their attempts at scurvy prevention. Pirate captains, keen to avoid crews of toothless buccaneers, hoarded limes like treasure, leading to the lifelong endearment of being called limeys. It's a shame citrusy gin cocktails weren't yet in vogue. Perhaps they would have broadened the appeal of their consumption beyond mere survival. Let us not forget the occasional culinary delights obtained during the more successful raids. Victorious over plundered galleons, pirates indulged in stolen spices and exotic fruits, transforming their feasts into rare banquets of stolen opulence. It was said that even Blackbeard himself occasionally partook in delicacies such as candied fruit and fine wine, although he likely felt more comfortable with a hearty grog and ship's biscuit. Yet, in their rambling, rackety lives, pirates taught us something that today's world of fast food and instant ramen tends to forget. They dined with camaraderie, shared what they had, and imbibed not just for the pleasure of spirits, but for the spirit of pleasure. They were a community, however ragtag, bonded by salty meals and saltier tales. As the moonlight caresses the gentle waves of our sleepy journey, let us drift further along the currents of time, with lanterns aglow and the creak of wooden ships as our lullaby. The next adventure awaits us beyond a gentle horizon, ready to sweep us off into more whispers of the past. So, my dear buccaneers of the bed, rest your weary eyes, lulled by the promise of more dreams filled with daring tales from the golden, shimmering tapestry of history. As the morning sun gently kissed the horizon, the sea was like a vast, shimmering tapestry of silk under the waking sky. Aboard the pirate ship, the air was thick with the aroma of the crew's breakfast, hardtack, and something the ship's cook sincerely promised was soup, though it might have just been seawater with a stray shoe floating in it. Life as a pirate wasn't all swashbuckling and buried treasure, despite what the stories might say. Between the fierce sea battles and the chants of yo-ho, yo-ho, there was also a lot of, well, waiting around. It turns out, hunting for ships to plunder was something like fishing, but with more shouting and a lot fewer sandwiches. Pirates spent hours scanning the horizon for merchant ships, which were their floating piggy banks, and while ennui settled on the slower days, opportunity could flash on the waves as quickly as lightning. Navigating the seas didn't come with GPS, and getting lost was somewhat of a running gag, though less funny when land was nowhere in sight and the rum stores ran perilously low. Pirates relied on the stars, a good compass, and a well-aged sea chart, rendered with thoughtful inaccuracies to keep competitors wandering in circles. Speaking of circles, even tattoos on board had a nautical theme: anchors, compasses, and, for some reason, an excessive number of parrots. Incidentally, parrots were as much pirate mascot as pet, handy for drama, and greatly appreciated for their ability to mimic a scorned captain's orders, to much crew amusement. Despite what fancy pirate costumes at theme parks might suggest, the real outfits on a pirate ship leaned hard towards practical rather than sartorial elegance. Heavy boots, bandanas, and coats that seemed to have won a grim fight with a moth colony were favored for their function. Although fashion did creep in with wild clashes of colorful sashes, plundered silk, no doubt, tied around waists. Pirates were too busy being pirates to worry about matching their scarves to their breeches after all. Now, as authenticity requires, Not all pirates sported an eye patch, but those who did knew that it wasn't just a gimmick. The savvy pirate wore eye patches to aid with acclimatizing vision between deck and below deck. Switch eyes, and suddenly it wasn't a case of, "Oops, I fell down the stairs again. Good thing I've got a spare peg leg in the hold." And what of the code, many wonder? The supposed set of rules that bound this merry band of lawbenders? Well, contrary to lawless assumption, most captains did enforce articles aboard. These were practical rules about distributing spoils, compensation for injuries, and maintaining, against all odds, a democratic essence. It might astonish you to know, but even a feared captain could find himself democratically removed if he didn't do his fair share of, say, scheming or dreaming up adventurous levels of piracy. Walk the Plank was tragically more of a Hollywood fabrication, but the threat of becoming a crab's new crustacean cousin among the reefs was enough to keep one's wits about them, as the waves continued their rhythmic lullabies, bringing a sleepy calm over even the most vigilant of watchmen. It's worth remembering, dear dreamer, that sea legs were not the only balance pirates needed. They were adroitly practiced in balancing duty, oh so delicately, with a firm embrace of the bizarrely beautiful life that was piracy. So let the gentle rock of the ship carry you like an ocean breeze, onward and onward, as tomorrow's adventures softly beckon on the edge of the world's map. Ever found yourself adrift in a sea of forgetful pirates with all the charm of a soggy biscuit? Don't worry, dear slumbering listener, for tonight we'll glide through the slightly stinky, wholly fascinating world of pirate hygiene, or, should we say, the lack thereof, in the Golden Age of Piracy. Now, before you wrinkle your nose too hard, remember this was a time when running water was a luxury and deodorants were as mythical as mermaids. So let's embark on this olfactory odyssey, shall we? Picture, if you will, the bustling deck of a pirate ship, sun setting on the horizon, and not a soap bubble in sight. Yes, pirates had to make do with what they had, which was typically not much in the cleanliness department. Their grooming routines tended to be as casual as their attitude toward other people's property. Bathing served more as a theoretical exercise rather than a practical one, which seemed only fitting for a group who lived perpetually on salty seas, or more likely, salty attitudes. It's not that pirates didn't care about hygiene. Well, on second thought, maybe it was exactly that. A dip in the ocean was considered a bath, although the water they'd been sailing through was often the very same used to toss overboard everything that didn't make the cut. Discarded food, old rags, and maybe an overly curmudgeonly parrot who had worn out its welcome. Naturally, this method lacked the soapy zestiness that modern showers bring. Bubbly surprises were few and far between on such nautical escapades. On land, if they happened upon a freshwater source, some pirates would take the plunge and likely mark it down as their biannual refreshment. Beard care was also a special pirate art. Imagine, if you will, the scruffy patches and wildly ungroomed facial hair fluttering in the sea breeze. Razor-sharp blades were meant for slicing cutlasses, not exactly the kind of tool you'd wish to press against your skin when aiming for a closer shave. As for clothing, picture a Picasso of patches and hems, held together by more hope than thread. Pirates dressed in what they could find, with little concern for trends or matching patterns. Clothes that even a scarecrow might shun. And while it might not have been vogue-worthy, their layers kept them warm during the chilly sea nights. Teeth care. Ah, yes. Let us delicately find our way to those pearly whites, or yellows, if we're being historically accurate, with a diet largely consisting of hardtack biscuits that could double as cannonballs and a generous serving of citrus fruits, because no right-minded pirate fancied a scurvy grimace. Teeth were oft as weathered as their storm-beaten sails. Toothbrushes, you ask. Why? Afraid rope strand or twig might suffice. And that's if they cared enough to even bother polishing those chompers between the rounds of grog. But amidst this sweat-salty lifestyle was a charming absurdity that almost made you grateful pirate ships didn't come equipped with smell-o-vision. You see, this was a time when, if you managed to keep your outfit free from excessive grime, you were considered positively dapper. Surprisingly, the pirate way of life didn't quite demand the same standards we cozy landlubbers might insist upon today. Lest you think these scalawags cared not at all, they had certain unspoken hygiene codes, like avoiding the necessity of a quarantine on board, which even the most carefree of buccaneers could agree was a fate worse than a lackluster loot. After all, if disease ran rampant, there'd be fewer hands for all that swashbuckling and merry thievery, something they simply could not abide. So as you drift slowly into the dreamy folds of slumber, bask in the soothing thought of a world where life was as rough as it was rollicking. Imagine those ships rocking gently on the waves, the distant cry of a gull punctuating the maritime mist, carrying stories of yore and a whiff of adventure. On that briny breeze, let's gently drift away from the fragrant folds of the pirate lifestyle to land us someplace equally curious and splendid, where further treasures of knowledge await to be uncovered, in dream or in history. Ah, the life aquatic, as our pirate adventure unfurls under a canopy of twinkling celestial secrets. Taking us along forgotten waves of the early 18th century, we find ourselves aboard a ship caught in the curious crossfire of camaraderie and raucousness, a veritable floating mishmash of seafaring personalities. Picture, if you will, the gentle chorus of snoring pirates interlaced with the distant splash of ocean waves. Oh, but life on a pirate ship was not all pearls, parrots, and pomp. For starters, the cuisine was less organically sourced and more, "I'll eat it if it stops the scurvy." Limes weren't just garnishes, they were the glistening heroes guarding your teeth. Imagine dining on ship's biscuits, also known as hardtack, aptly named for their rock-like texture. Every bite was a challenging negotiation, as if your teeth were in contractual dispute with a particularly recalcitrant plank. Contrary to popular belief, pirates didn't get the privilege of gourmet salt pork regularly. No, more often they savored a delightful dish known as peas pudding. Peas boiled into oblivion until they resembled something vaguely edible. Close your eyes and imagine that comforting, mushy texture and the distinctly uncomforting aroma tickling your nostrils across the open deck. Against this culinary background, the sound of a fiddle in the hands of a sea-seasoned player provided an auditory escape. This was in stark contrast to the frequent shanties that rang out, songs gleefully cursed with enough bawdy lyrics to make even Poseidon blush. A chorus that was half declaration of rebellion and half melodic slumber song under the moon's watchful eye, something to remind you why rum was an essential part of the pirate diet. As you drift further into the world of early 18th century piratical life, envision the pirates themselves donning every imaginable iteration of attire, from the practical to the downright peculiar. The flamboyance of Captain John Womble, known for his impressive feathered hat collection, or the understated practicality of the Lass pirates, whose attire allowed for efficient pilfering and smoother scaling of ships. Interestingly enough, these fashion statements were less about vanity and more about commandeering one's own unique flair in a world of identical Jolly Rogers. The year while my ship itself lived and breathed as much as its crew, wood creaking rhythmically like an old sea ballad heard in a seashell, a reminder that at any moment your vessel might decide to play an unexpected game of "let's see if we can float." Pirates were shipwrights at heart, everyone participating in repairs after storms or skirmishes, a patchwork quilt of mismatched planks, a testament to battles fought and won, to storms weathered and survived, transforming scarred ships into legendary stories set adrift. The Pirate Code, that glorious set of rules practically scribbled with ink from a quill dipped in rum, kept this ragtag assembly feeling like the world's most disorderly family. Sharing loot was more than just spoils division. It was a democracy at sea, with a touch of equity to ensure every tooth and nail fighter got a share of the plunder pie. With the stars shimmering overhead and the winds whispering through the sails, there was always time for tales of ghost ships, sea, monsters, or mysterious islands leading to treasure chests buried by Blackbeard himself, an enduring favorite among yarn spinners. But heed well the wisdom of the grey-bearded pirate. While on deck, under Orion's watchful gaze, Keep your ears peeled for the call of the sea, beckoning you toward adventures unknown. As this chapter of our voyage sails to a gentle close, with the sea's lullaby leading us into more dreams of maritime exploits, we find solace in the ship's gentle rocking. So, dear listener, as you settle deeper under your covers, remember, every pirate voyage is steeped in the murmur of history and the thrill of the unknown drifting ahead. As the gentle waves lapped against the weathered hull of the pirate ship, casting shimmering moonlight reflections on the dark, expansive sea, we find ourselves drawn into the heart of our tale. Tonight, we're venturing into the little-known, surprisingly soothing world of pirate fashion, a topic that's not just about tattered rags and the occasional eye patch. Oh no, dear listener. Think of it more as the haute couture of the high seas, with a touch of practical flair and a dash of unimaginable creativity. Pirates, you see, were the original rebels, with a wardrobe to match their reputation. But did you know their fashion choices also doubled as a strategic play in their maritime chess game? Picture a pirate captain, the George Clooney of the 17th century seas, if you will, strutting about in a finely embroidered coat, possibly delicately pilfered from a well-stocked merchant's wardrobe. It was extravagant, sure, but who doesn't love a little opulence while terrorizing the ocean? The coat wasn't just for show, though. It was an intimidating uniform, designed to instill fear into the hearts of anyone who dared to cross their path. Imagine the practical benefits, too. Extra pockets for stashing precious loot or snacks, perhaps, because a hungry pirate is a cranky pirate, and no one wants that on a long voyage. Moving on to their utterly fabulous headgear. The tricorn hat was the headliner, literally. It made for the perfect rain barrier, turning stormy nights into something of a romantic drama fest, albeit one with a bit more swashbuckling. And if, perchance, someone like Captain Jack Rackham lost his hat to the wind, well, there'd be nothing left to do but swipe another from the next unwitting gentleman who dared to flaunt one within arm's reach. However, not all was flamboyant and free on the blue waters. Pirate fashion had its cruel side too. Yes, even pirates knew the discomfort of a poorly chosen fabric. Wool in the tropics, a rookie error. The smarter souls opted for lighter, breathable fabrics pilfered from the silken vaults of captured ships, often repurposing them into surprisingly stylish bandanas. More than just a bold aesthetic choice, these head wraps doubled as a subtle nod of solidarity amongst comrades navigating the enigmatic seas, adorning the pirates' sun-kissed skin were tattoos, an artistic chronicle of their adventures. Each inky marvel wasn't just an aggressive rebellion against the norms of polite society, but a permanent journal of their encounters, all within range of mere sleeves. Perhaps you might have seen one reading, "Swim at your own risk," etched above an anchor, a functional tattoo indeed. And let's not forget about the footwear, highly sensible albeit stolen boots. Rumor has it, someone once tried to convince the crew that stilettos were optimal for cannon-firing posture. Needless to say, it was a short-lived experiment. Ultimately, sturdy leather boots ruled the day, perfect for both swabbing decks and not so gallantly outrunning your responsibilities. Jewelry sparkled in abundance as well, often pillaged and worn as trophies of past conquests. However, those gleaming, dangling trinkets weren't the mere result of vanity. Some pirates believed in fashioning golden hoop earrings as makeshift insurance, a kind of savings. Seemed to plan for their earthly demise. The gold would pay for a decent burial. Yes, the same pirates who fearlessly dove into the murky depths of battle still fancied a dignified farewell. And so, as our pirate ensemble twirls amongst the glittering stars, deckhands gracefully tangle with the rigging above, rocking gently into eternity. The fashion choices of these high seas renegades remind us there's a playful elegance even in piracy, a balance of cloth and cunning, whatever it takes to make a name on the waves. Snuggle in and ponder this timeless dance of fabric and fate as the tides begin to turn toward our next, night-born adventure. As our dreamy voyage sails onward, Tonight, the stars above the sleepy waves will guide us to the curious world of pirate democracy. Yes, dear listener, you heard that right. Our boisterous buccaneers had a surprisingly democratic way of running their ships, a shock to any scallywag who assumed the captain ruled with an iron hook. Imagine, if you will, a group of toughened sailors gathered round on the deck under the yawning sails that flap gently in the evening breeze. It's not just the sea that is restless tonight, it's decision-making time on the Jolly Roger, and no swashbuckling soul is about to be left out. Our pirate forebears, perhaps dissatisfied with the stiff hierarchy of the merchant navies, embraced shared governance on the high seas. The captain, noble as he might be with his feathered hat, was at the mercy of his crew's very democratic wishes. Each man, and an occasional woman, aboard had a voice, and more importantly, a vote. Their matters might not sound like weighty affairs of state, but aboard the ship, they were of utmost importance. Who should be the captain? Where should they raid next? How should they divide the spoils? All voted upon with the seriousness of a parliamentary session, but with considerably more rum, one might imagine. However, before you picture hasty votes concluded merely with a show of hands, know this. Pirate democracy also included something of an early form of the recall vote. A captain seen to be leading his crew into troubled waters, literally or metaphorically, could swiftly find himself out of a job, replaced by a more popular candidate. It was a living embodiment of the notion, to each according to his abilities, or perhaps how well they can aim a cannon. Interestingly, the position of quartermaster held nearly equal power to that of the captain. Acting as a sort of pirate lawyer, accountant and union representative rolled into one, the quartermaster made sure justice was served according to pirate law, which was less about justice and more about making sure nobody stole your share. This wise and cunning soul accepted grievances, settled disputes, and doled out punishments with the measured authority one might attribute to a kindly pediatrician who can also swing a cutlass with rather unsettling precision. But perhaps the most adored element of pirate democracy was the division of plunder, a term that sounds infinitely grander than the inevitable squabble over gold doubloons that it actually was. Shares were doled out specifically. Captain and key crew members would receive twice, maybe thrice, a regular share, but even the lowliest deckhand could expect a piece of the conquering loot. Yes, votes were cast, agreements reached, and dare I say, even grievances aired, all in a fashion that would make any mariner of the time feel mighty proud. Despite these systems of fair conduct and negotiation, it's crucial to remember one thing. Pirates remained unpredictable dreamers of the sea. Democracy, charming as it was, required a steady hand and even steadier resolve, which could fray faster than a wind-tossed sail in the fevered hunt for treasure. Yet, it was these very democratic underpinnings that set pirates apart from other maritime professions of their age. Well, that and their penchant for eye patches and parrots. Even as the salty waves whisper lullabies to our weary adventurers, we now gently sail close to new horizons, promising yet further tales of swashbuckling legend. The night grows deeper, stars twinkling like pearls spilled across a velvety sky. Prepare yourself, dear listener, as we drift quietly onward through the dreamy seas of history, toward adventures yet untold. With that, keep your ears open and your dreams unfurled, for the ocean holds endless mysteries lingering just beyond the horizon. If ever you find yourself in the middle of the Caribbean, surrounded by nothing but the vast, azure embrace of the ocean, it would be wise to picture yourself aboard a pirate ship during the Golden Age of Piracy. Picture this. It's a warm, breezy night under an indigo sky, sprinkled with more stars than you ever knew existed. The pirate ship sways gently with the lull of the waves below, and you, dear soon-to-be sauntering off to dreamland listener, are nestled amidst an eclectic crew that could have stepped straight out of an epic sea shanty. Now every pirate worth their weight in doubloons has one inevitable daily confrontation, the feast. But before you conjure images of lavish banquets with succulent turkeys and overflowing goblets of grog, let me gently wake you from that vision with a subtle nudge of reality. Pirate dining was less about gourmet cuisine and more about mastering the art of creative compromise. Once aboard, the average pirate had to develop quite an intimate relationship with an unlikely starchy friend, the ship's biscuit, or as it were affectionately termed, ship's tack. These gloriously unappetizing discs were a staple. They were rock hard, practically indestructible, and if swallowed whole, would make your dentist richer than a seized Spanish galleon. We're not saying these biscuits could double as hammerheads, but you could probably crack a tooth or two trying to nibble through one. Accompanying the regal ship's tack was salt, pork. Imagine, if you will, receiving a Christmas ham every year since the last decade, and having it sunbathe on the deck for all those years. This dried, intensely salted meat was preserved to last, which worked in theory. In practice, it required a jaw-strengthening workout to chew. Of course, if you softened it in rum, a versatile culinary aid, mind you, it could go down a tad more agreeably. Or at least, that's what the crew told themselves, with a courageous grin, or perhaps due to resignation. For the more ambitious pirates among you, there was always the possibility of fresh fare, but it demanded some creativity and a spotless record of avoiding scurvy, that ancient mariner's boon. With a little luck, and sometimes downright cheeky pilfering from passing merchant ships, pirates could feast on fruits and the fresh catch from the sea. Any fish who dared to jump aboard was met not with a pleasant welcome, but an impromptu dinner engagement. Then there was the all-important drink. Water, unsurprisingly, was about as popular as a seawater shower. With supplies quickly spoiling in barrels, water was reserved for emergencies. Instead, thirst was quenched with a blend of beer or a weak variety of rum termed grog, which got its name from the distinctive grogginess it seemed to instill. Amidst the humdrum of nightly routines governed as much by the moon's grace as by the captain's rum-fueled embellishments of glory days, sat the communal meal. It wasn't just about staving off hunger, but about the camaraderie, the shared tales of fictional treasures and hypothetical battles, building an oral tapestry as intricate and tangled as a carelessly thrown ship's net. There was something gloriously egalitarian about it all, a democracy of sorts, at least as far as the dinner menu was concerned. Everyone, from the crusty old salt who claimed he once soaked in kraken tears, to the nervous young deckhand who wasn't sure what a kraken was, shared the same generous helpings of daily rations. Together they laughed, traded improbable stories, and perhaps plotted their next adventure from beneath the cloak of night. So, as the strumming of an improvised sea shanty mingles with the gentle lapping of waves, the scene dims its candlelight glow, melting into the embrace of another tropical night. Remember, dear listener, you're falling asleep amidst a band of rogues who celebrated the truest kind of freedom, one born not only of breaking rules on the high seas, but defying the little culinary frequencies of their time. And as the gentle lull of the ocean beckons, the story whispers a graceful nod to the next chapter of our sleepy saga, where the quest for mythical treasures transitions into the softer, dreamier landscapes of imagination, as the stars gently twinkled above in a dance older than time itself. We're lured away from our safe harbor, deeper into the mysterious allure of pirate life on the high seas. Imagine, if you will, a life swathed in tales of daring exploits and timeless freedom, tucked away in the 17th century like a wanted poster slipped behind the local tavern's bar. With the sea breeze whispering through rigging and the wood beneath your feet creaking softly like an old lullaby, we find ourselves contemplating the role of piratical democracy. Yes, dear listener, while civilizations on land were just muddling through monarchies and messy feudal systems, the pirates of the Golden Age had devised something remarkably forward-thinking, a democracy on the waves. It's said to rival the most spirited PTA meetings you've never attended. Imagine that, a policy of plunder by committee, where decisions weren't just barked out by a captain, but voted upon by crew members who apparently had a lot more say than you'd think you'd find in a den of rogues and scallywags. This watery world of governance was a curious blend of authoritarian decision-making and democratic deliberations. Captains were indeed the stars of the show, but much like reality TV, sometimes those stars could be voted off the ship. See, captains had absolute authority during battles, usually because it's best not to have everyone voting on the best run-from-cannonball strategies mid-panic. However, once the battle ensued, how shares of treasure were divided, whether pirate utopia would set sail next, and whether fish fry Fridays would ever become a thing, were all subjects for earnest, albeit salty, debate. And rules. There were rules, known charmingly as the Articles, and these weren't your run-of-the-mill, time's up house rules. These were clear, precise, and impressively enforced. They were contracts every pirate had to sign at the outset, with a flourish, or possibly a growl. You see, anarchy might seem like the default setting, but one simply cannot run a ship without order. Imagine the chaos if everyone decided to sail in their own direction. Not to mention, how would they ever synchronize their sea shanties? Furthermore, equal shares were the norm, with everyone's loot meticulously appointed. There were, of course, exceptions. The captain and quartermaster naturally gained a larger piece of the treasure pie, which, notably, contained less pie and considerably more gold, gems, and possibly exotic spices. But bonuses were to be had. Lose an arm to British fire, have a sack of coins, get a cutlass-induced limp. Well, there's a silver lining in the form of extra cobs to jingle. But life on the sea, even one under a democratic sun, had its trials. If one were to break the rules, the punishment was usually just as creative as the offense. Stealing from fellow pirates was the greatest sin, which was an ironic twist when stealing from not fellow pirates was, well, the whole point. Often, the mutinous or too rowdy crew members would find themselves marooned on an island, given a pistol with a single shot, which could serve for either defense or, in less fortunate circumstances, surrender. Despite the hardships, each pirate sows dreams into the horizon, heads held high as the sea breeze kisses their cheeks. And so the democracy sails on with the tides, with every man casting a vote and pitching in to raise sails, swab decks, and argue if avast or ahoy has the superior ring. Now, as our ships ride the gentle swells once more, it's time to let the winds of rest carry us further into the pirate's domain. With the echo of laughter and clinking of mugs fading into the night, we slip past the edges of dreams into the chapter of quiet pursuits that caress the pirate life. Our story sails gently onward, moving us in league with the ocean's balm, a slow drift into the night, one steady wave after another, over the azure expanse of the Caribbean. Beneath the twinkling starlit tapestry, a pirate ship rocked gently to the rhythm of lullaby waves. Let's peer into one of those board vessels, where a scene typical of the pirate life unfolds, one that's not quite what the movies told you, since the movies didn't have to sleep on lumpy hammocks. In this moment, we're delving into the less gloriously heralded side of pirate life, sleep, or rather, the nightly battle against the lack of it. Sleep was a precarious commodity, much like their coveted treasure, and a pirate's dreams, when finally attained, were as richly bizarre as their waking adventures had been. While sleep was occasionally interrupted by unexpected cannonballs, most nights were far less explosive, but equally uncomfortable. Picture now, if you will, a humble pirate's hammock. Though it might look like a cozy cocoon of fabric, in reality, it was often more akin to a swaying straitjacket. Sleepers rocked back and forth, their bodies enveloped like cheerful burritos made of rough sailcloth. Such innovation arose from necessity, as it turns out that rocking oneself to sleep is far trickier amidst the relentless roll of the ocean. The orchestra of the high seas provided the soundtrack, the creak of wood, the yawn of ropes, the occasional splash as some unfortunate recruit took an unwelcome nap in the brine, thanks to a miscalculated step or an uncharitable nudge. These were the symphonies of their eve, a far cry from music but oddly soothing in its constancy. For these adventurers caught somewhere between legitimate merchants and men of dubious moral flexibility, the 17th century equivalent of a home security system was a fellow pirate named One-Eyed Bob, who'd been put on night watch. With an eye patch covering an eye that one must hope was still operational, Bob ensured that no other pirate was out pillaging their ship while they rested. Now, back on shore, the legends tell tales of rum-fueled debauchery and treasure splits by flickering candlelight. But in truth, a pirate's nest, rest, was occasionally warmed by more than grog. Picture, just once, a pirate tenderly taking needle and thread to the torn sails before snuggling into their swinging cocoon, sighing indulgently at a job well mended. But life on the sea demanded more than a pretense of relaxation. It demanded imagination. A pirate needed dreams, ambitions, even when eyes were closed. Lulled by the echoes of the endless sea and maybe a pinch too much rum, their sleepy heads swam with visions of a conquered enemy ship or the more dangerous concept, gaining and keeping loyalty. However dreamy the night might have been, dawn would insist on its regular, swagger-free arrival. Light played mysteriously upon the water, and in that moment, as the sky painted with its golden hues and the sea mirrored back tales untold, one could imagine what a more mundane life might have been like. Perhaps in those dreamy, pre-dawn minutes, the life of a simple farmer or an innkeeper seemed strangely appealing. But nah, those professions lacked the crucial excitement of parrot management or cannonball dodging. And as the sun summoned the pirates, from their dreams there was a sluggish, sometimes comical emergence from the bunks. Hammocks disgorged their contents with more grace for some than others. And would you look at that? A new day greeting our scallywags, filled with possibilities that were awaiting only their slightly bleary-eyed grasp. With the cloak of night retreating, pirate life tickled the horizon once more, brimming with promise. I wager it wasn't just the distant shimmer of treasure or the taste of an unclaimed ship that stirred these weary adventurers to wake. Perhaps it was, every so often, the hope of things less glittering and more grounding, like starting fresh in the surprising tranquility found in the wobbly embrace of their ship's deck. And so, until the tales pick up their sails once again, bedtime stories linger close, a gentle promise of more maritime mischief and softly rendered dreams. Picture yourself lounging on the sandy shores of a tropical paradise, the salty air tingling in your nostrils like a mischievous nudge from Neptune himself. This, my weary dreamers, is where we find ourselves in the midst of the pirates' wondrous, albeit treacherous, Golden Age, where sword-swinging and treasure hunting were just a day at the office. Aboard our creaky vessel, the likes of which could have easily been a stunning backdrop for numerous dental hygiene advertisements, the pirate crew was learning a rather important lesson in the business of piracy, the art of persuasion, or, as they called it, convincing people to give us their shinies without a fuss. This magical charisma was usually led by the ship's charismatic quartermaster, a position that would have made him the cool, rebellious teacher in the ever-dangerous classroom of the sea. Known for his charm as deadly as his blade, he'd often be the one to waltz over to a captured ship, personifying diplomacy with the same subtlety as a rhinoceros in a fine china shop. "Now, mates," he'd begin with a grin as wide and welcoming as a voyage through the Bermuda Triangle in August. "It's come to our friendly attention that you're holding some goods, what we'd be keen on borrowing." At this point, he'd carefully ignite his well-practiced, warm smile, usually capable of making people feel right at ease, and ready to hand over their valuables. But in this chapter of wild misadventure, they found themselves dealing with a most unusual merchant, a retired philosopher who, after getting bored with inventing hypotheticals, had taken up importing and exporting exotic cheeses. It was the kind of profession that might raise an eyebrow and loosen a belt simultaneously. When approached, this philosopher posed the question, why would one person need so much cheese, and why does one need to take it from another? our charming quartermaster, failing to recall his days as the ship's amateur Socrates, hesitated just long enough to let a spark of doubt flicker on his weather-beaten face. "Well, stowaways, that's a right good question," he began, noticing for the first time in his seafaring career that he didn't have all the answers. The crew and their erstwhile philosopher cheese merchant found themselves debating everything from metaphysics and the nature of existence to the optimal conditions for cheese maturation, ironically, so engrossed that any plans of robbery happily melted away, much like the cheese on a midsummer deck. The pirate lifestyle, as night fell and laughter echoed across the inky waves, seemed momentarily transformed by contemplative camembert musings and the kind of philosophical conversations that could only happen when salty sea dogs were faced with existential questions, and dairy as formidable as a storm. Meanwhile, as laughter faded into the groan of the ship's wood, many of the crew concluded that life, much like chasing treasure, might just be one really long cheese joke, one that you're never quite sure how it'll end, but you're sure to enjoy. The punchline whenever it arrives. And thus the crew cheerfully parted ways with their new friend, having taken nothing from him except a newfound sense of reflective introspection, and perhaps a few too many cheesy puns. This wasn't precisely in line with the golden tradition of piracy, but the warmth of human connection often proves a treasure chest itself, brimming with the finest doubloons of unexpected friendship. So as our brave seafarers sailed into the encroaching night, the philosopher's words lingered like the sweetest thought in the creaking echoes of the ship, setting a course towards the horizon where surely more adventures, and hopefully a less philosophical jackpot, awaited them. Let your mind drift upon the gentle lap of ocean waves, as elsewhere in the vast expanse of the open sea. Somewhere ahead in the moon's silvery path awaited tales of buccaneers and further whimsical wonders, inviting courage and a hearty appetite for tomorrows. Who knows what sunlit shores or shadowy coves await next, where silk sails flutter and the sea whispers secrets long into the stretches of sleepy night. Imagine, if you will, the rhythmic lull of the ocean, waves gently rocking a stout wooden ship under a starlit sky. It's the kind of gentle motion that could practically sing a lullaby, which is rather handy, given that aboard this vessel are some of history's most notorious insomniacs, pirates. Welcome aboard to Chapter 17, where we delve into the surprisingly domestic side of pirate life during the so-called Golden Age, an era that, if we're honest, was less golden and more brass, slightly tarnished. Picture this. The moon shines bright on the lapping sea, providing enough light for a tight-knit crew to settle into their evening routines. After a long day of plunder and ponder, these sea dogs aren't so different from you or me at bedtime. They'd brush their teeth, if they had any left. Instead, they might engage in a curious ritual known as whistle for the wind, a practice less about dental hygiene and more about pleading with the sea breeze to be merciful come morning. For pirates, wrapping up the day was as much about camaraderie as it was about enforcing a very loose code of ethics. Imagine a communal supper of salted meat and hardtack, the 17th century's answer to beef, jerky, and stale crackers. It's a meal that would put even the strongest constitutions to sleep. As they dined, tales of daring escapades were exchanged, some as grandiose as the sea was wide, others likely embellished with more flourish than fact. But what's a bedtime routine without a lullaby? And who better to serenade the crew than the fearsome pirate fiddler? With a melody that could rival even the sweetest of sirens, the fiddler's tunes were the Spotify playlists of the 1600s. As sea shanties drifted on the wind, grog mugs clinked in a toast to victories and dreams of future adventures, sprinkled with the occasional practical joke involving a strategic hammock swap. Nothing says sweet dreams quite like waking up entangled in someone else's hammock. As the night deepened, those not on watch duty sought the creaking comfort of their hammocks. Pirates swirled into sleep like rum into a mug, wielding dreams as vivid as their reputations were infamous. With one eye open, ever mindful of mutiny or, worse still, a fellow pirate borrowing their boots, these buccaneers drifted off to the sound of seabirds and distant thunder. Interestingly, many ships had a strict no snoring policy, not for the sake of peaceful sleep, but to avoid attracting unwanted sea creatures curious about the curious symphony above. As candles dimmed and laughter softened to murmurs, the ship was left in the hands of the night crew. The watch kept vigilant eyes on the horizon, scanning for the telltale outline of prey, or perhaps a coastline promising refuge and revelry. These night owls would have made excellent baristas, fueled by the maritime equivalent of a double espresso, nifty night brews of coffee, mixed with a generous splash of whatever spirit was not entirely tied up in the last merry round. Funny, isn't it? In many ways, these pirates were just like us, seeking moments of rest and the comforting routine of bedtime beneath the twinkling blanket of the stars. And as they nestled snugly in their hammocks, with dreams as grand as the ocean's expanse, they embodied the universal human desire for a good night's sleep and a brighter tomorrow, where treasures awaited in new worlds yet undiscovered. As the stars themselves began to yawn and dim in their celestial canopy, the ship continued its steady course under the silent watch of the ancient night sky. Perhaps, somewhere in the whispers of the wind, the promise of another day awaited, a day filled with marvelous mysteries and adventures on the horizon. But those whispers will have to wait as we turn the page to see what awaits at dawn's first light. Until then, let the rhythm of the waves cradle you into a restful slumber as we bid farewell to another enchanting night upon these endlessly alluring seas. As the moonlight glistened across the gentle waters of the Caribbean, the pirate's life was surprisingly as much about etiquette as it was about adventure. If you imagined pirates to be all parrot squawks and peg legs, you might be pleasantly amused to learn that their seafaring lives also involved a unique set of customs, surprisingly democratic in nature, tied up with as many knots as the ships they sailed on. Picture this: a raucous crew aboard a sturdy vessel, perhaps the Black Pearl or the Queen Anne's Revenge, led by the infamously dramatic Blackbeard himself. Instead of a tyrannical rule by fear and beard alone, it was a world governed by the Pirate Code, a peculiar document written, sometimes quite literally, between battles and rum rations, and clad in saltwater and adventure. Pirates might not have worn powdered wigs, but that doesn't mean they didn't have their own version of parliamentary system, entirely voter-based under the full moon. Different ships had slightly different variations, of course, but typically, key decisions, such as when to attack, who would scout ahead, or how to divvy up the spoils, were decided by a ship's council. In what could be the precursor to modern staff meetings, pirates would gather round, each having equal say, with the majority vote setting the course for their next pillage or plunder. Democracy on the high seas might sound romantic, but imagine making crucial decisions while several members were 3 sheets to the wind, an expression suggesting they were as drunk as a compass needle out of line. And let's not gloss over the pirate articles, which would often include details like compensation for injuries, cutthroat insurance plans, if you will. Lose an eye, here's your payment in pieces of 8. Lost a limb, that's worth a tidy sum more, enough perhaps to buy a second-hand parrot or a particularly sharp hook. Now, if you think captains were akin to despotic kings, think again. The captain, while leading the charge into battle, was often elected rather than self-appointed, and he could be voted out faster than you could say, walk the plank, if the crew deemed his leadership skills to be, let's say, inadequate. Consider that next time you're dubious about shared governance. It worked for pirates, after all. Adding to this odd juxtaposition was their peculiar sense of style. Pirates weren't just about practicality, they were trendsetters of the sea. Amidst the chaos of daily plundering, they often ended up with wardrobes that could rival any fashionista's collection. Imagine the scene: a burly pirate, balanced precariously on a moving deck, yet adorned with lace cuffs, a fine tricorn hat, and perhaps the odd piece of stolen jewelry. That's high seas haute couture for you, achieved by raiding not just spices but entire wardrobes of the ships they encountered. The pirates' day wasn't all sword fights and nautical debates, though. The quieter hours were spent swapping tales, playing games like dice or card games on fading decks beneath twinkling stars. This was leisure at sea, punctuated occasionally by a banjo or someone's best attempt at sea shanties, an early form of pirate karaoke, only without the microphones and voting panels. Now, just as your eyes grow heavy and you're finding comfort in the rhythms of their oceanic revelry, imagine drifting into another dream. That of the pirate's lore itself, a world of nuanced codes and unexpected civility. As moonbeams dance over the waves, let them guide you gently towards rest, but keep your senses attuned for further tales of adventure over the horizon, where perhaps you'll discover more of the secrets whispered between the crests and troughs of a pirate's dreamy world. As the gentle waves of the Caribbean rocked the ship, pirates aboard the Black Diamond knew it was time for yet another crew meeting held under the stars and the swagging pirate flag. Captain Herringbone, with his modest feathered hat, the kind you'd expect to find on a fashionable parrot, called for order. Despite being called Herringbone, the captain had not a single fishy bone in his body, unless you counted his curious affinity for smoked herring. Now, on this fine moonlit night, the crew wasn't discussing grand treasure or logistic triumphs of their pirate exploits. Instead, they were embroiled in a heated debate over a topic that still mystifies historians today: nautical fashion sense. You see, the creation of perfectly billowing shirts, capable of emulating dramatic moments of heroism like those found in romantic novels, was of utmost importance. "Ah, ye see, lads," Captain Herringbone's voice resonated through the crowd. "A true pirate shirt should be as white as sea foam, but with sleeves as wide as the ocean." The crew nodded in agreement, each contemplating how the spray of salt water always added an unintended dash of ruggedness to their otherwise impeccable attire. In the early 18th century, pirate fashion was as much about practicality as it was about intimidation. Loose clothing offered ease of movement during boarding actions, a fact not lost on the fashion-forward crew of the Black Diamond. But beyond mere style, it was about expressing one's individuality. After all, what pirate wanted to sail the high seas looking like a poor, hapless landlubber? Yet, there was another side to this sartorial story, one that unfolded not just on deck, but in the lively port taverns of Tortuga and Nassau. A pirate who didn't mind showing off a bit of flair would often be found at the tailor's, funding new trends with the riches he'd conveniently acquired from the Spanish Main. Fancy waistcoats and breeches of brightly coloured fabrics were lauded, possibly inspired by the colourful feathers and shiny scales of parrots and exotic fish they encountered in their travels. Young Jonathan, the ship's newest recruit, was particularly taken with his time on shore leave. He'd return, pockets slightly lighter but ever more flamboyantly dressed. His latest acquisition was a waistcoat of such dazzling hue that even the sundial had to ask for sunglasses. But Jonathan was committed, insisting his flashy attire might distract enemies in battle, or at least make their vision blurry. As the waves continued their rhythmic dance against the ship's hull, quiet murmurs spread across the deck. Pirates began to swap tales of their favorite pieces of apparel, traded or stolen. Not a few of these garments had funny tales attached to them, such as Long Tom's trousers, which had started as an unplanned acquisition but turned into a legend, mistakenly hoisted and saluted as the Union Jack in a fog-heavy harbour. The pirate ladies, often painted with equal charm as their male counterparts in history's tapestry, had their bold styles. Anne Bonny was notably remembered for her daring looks, often donning the trousers and jackets of her male colleagues. She wasn't alone in this sartorial rebellion, as it was infinitely practical for those memorable sword fights and dashing escapes. Thus, the conversation on deck shifted toward the significance of fashion as a form of pirate rebellion and camaraderie. While each crew member's taste ranged between the audaciously bright and the impressively practical, all agreed on the universal wisdom. One must always dress like a pirate, but also for success, especially if that success meant successfully spooking your enemies. As the meeting concluded under the gentle gaze of the moon, The pirates returned to their respective corners of the ship, each dreaming of higher adventures and perhaps a bit more colourful loot to add to their wardrobes. Captain Herringbone let out a heartfelt sigh, filled with pride at his crew's antics and commitment to style. Who knew that even at Cassis, fashion held such sway? The Black Diamond sailed on through the tranquil night, cradled by the waves, as each member of her crew drifted into the realm of slumber, minds alive with dreams and the soft echoes of evening discussions, calmly setting the stage for whatever vivid adventures awaited next on their horizon. As twilight settled over the Caribbean Sea, casting its deep indigo cloak across the horizon, our dear pirate, a veteran of 100 breathtaking skirmishes and 1,000 unexciting ship maintenance chores, found themselves contemplating the phenomenon of pirate fashion. Yes, fashion. Because even salt-soaked sea dogs deserve to make a sartorial statement, especially when engaging in the noble art of plundering treasure. Picture, if you will, a ship teeming with swashbucklers, each trying to outdo one another not just in skill and bravado, but in the flair of their apparel. Home to flamboyant captains, each outfitted with frock coats so extravagant they seemed purpose-made for a new wave Paris runway, and trousers baggier than a first-year seaman's confidence. A pirate ship was a floating, styling safari, flamboyantly adventurous, with more splashes of color than a carnival on parade. For starters, let's discuss their hats. Not just any hat, mind you, but the tricorn, adorned with so many feathers, you'd half expect them to fly off on their own. These hats were more than mere sun protectors. They were status symbols, custom crafted to say, I mean business, but I'm also here to party. And yes, I will steal your gold in style. Then there were the scarves. A pirate's scarf had to be tied just right. Too tight, and you'd have a headache more bothersome than an angry parrot. Too loose, and you'd spend the day shielding your eyes from the sun's insistent glare. They draped them over heads, around necks, and sometimes used them to wipe away the tears of heartbreak from being marooned with nothing but one's own cooking. Ah, the shirts. Billowy. Shirts weren't just the fashion of the day. They were a pirate's best friend, making even the scrawniest swindler look as brawny as a deckhand who could wrestle a shark and win. White or cream was the preference, presumably because it best hid all the rum stains, though convincing anyone they could actually stay white amid ship grime was as fantastical as impending retirement plans funded by plunder. And let's not forget the button-covered waistcoats beneath those coats, a veritable labyrinth of shiny trappings that were seldom buttoned, likely because after fastening the first 10 buttons, even the most dashing buccaneer would lose patience and balance if done standing on deck. Cruel seamanship required every fabric to be durable, capable of withstanding not just the rigors of salt and sea, but those untimely brawls over the last leg of ham in the hold. A smart sailor knew better than to scuffle with someone who sewed his own patches. They had patience aplenty, and probably a sharp needle on hand. Footwear was equally essential, if less glamorous. A sort of Cinderella story. If Cinderella ideally wore boots designed to withstand heavy climbing, rigorous dancing, and the slapstick comedy of finding one's footing on slippery decks. The remarkable agility required to navigate deck and rig alike meant boots were functional, although a sensible pirate always packed a second pair for his shore leave escapes. In the dim glow of a lone lantern rocking gently overhead, our piratical fashion connoisseur drifted off into a peaceful reflection. Was it the glistening sequins on their coat catching the moonlight that brought serenity? Or maybe it was just the long day's work of plunder and parley, fashion setting and seafaring. Either way, it was time for some well-earned rest. And so, with a keen eye for style and a dreamy contemplation of the waves, the stars, and perhaps the odd abandoned treasure chest awaiting discovery, our pirate begins to slumber. From their vibrant deck to the limitless sea, the thought of distant adventures tugs the edges of their sleep, whispering softly of the wonders the morrow might bring. Nestle in, dear listener, for as our pirate drifts toward dreamy oblivion, so too do we weave through the stitches of history setting course for the next tale that unfolds just beyond night's curtain. Tomorrow brings a new page, one filled with adventure, discovery, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit more fashion, as the moon dips her toes into the velvety waters of the Caribbean, casting a gentle silken embrace over our brave band of drowsy swashbucklers. We find ourselves aboard the rickety sloop, the Sea Loaf. Tonight, it's not barrels of rum nor thrill of plunder that captures the minds of these dreamers of the high seas, but rather the somewhat forgotten art of pirate healthcare, because even the fiercest marauders sneeze. Imagine the scene. Under the twinkle of stars brighter than Captain Kidd's most coveted treasure, the pirates gather for a peculiar yet pressing emergency meeting. Everyone is present, from Pegleg Pete, who's always been suspiciously good at jigs, to Half-Ear Harry, renowned for hearing only what he wanted to. It appears that scurvy, that ancient and inexplicably vitamin C-related affliction, has made a very unwelcome on-board visit. A lantern swings softly from the mast, casting curious shadows as Barnacle Bill, unofficial ship's medic due to his one-time visit to a barber in Havana, takes center stage. Bill, with his trusty assortment of questionable tools, primarily consisting of a hook, a prayer book, and something that suspiciously looks like a shoehorn, addresses the forlorn sea marauders. With a voice as soothing as a gruff lullaby, he explains the wonders of citrus fruits, ironically, the rarest of treasures found on a pirate's ship. His plan is simple: steal lemons from the next unfortunate coastal market. Of course, the pirates express their discontent, as lemons notoriously look quite similar to gold doubloons to the average, half-asleep, sodium-deprived seafarer. But under the relentless sway of a hammock and the soft groan of the ocean, it's hard to protest for long. Outside the hull, a salty breeze carries the scent of the open sea, calming the nerves of even the most ruffled buccaneers. The ship's cat, named Sir Whiskers III, but often mistaken for an additional piece of rope, strolls along the deck, offering his casual wisdom in the language of purrs and paw pads. His presence is both mystical and mundane, ever watchful for glimmers of fish or flying shoelaces. As the laughter dissipates into the night, eyes begin to droop and conversations meander like a small stream over pebbles. Under Bill's direction, they begin to weave a net out of spare rigging, not for fish, but for capturing the fantastical dream that someday, perhaps, pirates would be remembered not just for their treasure, but their citrus-laden chests. Such chests, they muse, could truly change the face of future pirate medicine forever. Suddenly, a voice arises from the slumbering mass. It's no other than Sleepy Sam, a tall tale of a man with a penchant for nocturnal storytelling. He begins recounting legends of Cuddly Cook Carol, famed in songs for her pies made of limes, coconuts, and only a touch of the sea breeze. Her pastries were rumored to cure anything from ailing bones to a pirate's blues. The tale softly meanders, as do the muffled snores of the crew, like the low hum of a contented harbor. The moon glows knowingly, observing this sleepy rehearsal of the morrow's health revolution. If the history of piracy should teach us anything tonight, it's that life at sea was not just about pillage and plunder, but occasionally about piracy's softer, almost comforting sides, such as making sure everyone had enough vitamin C. As the waves cradled the Sea Loaf towards another colliginous horizon, thoughts of lemony dreams beckon to new adventures. For some, a future of teeth firmly nestled in gums, and for others, perhaps the realization that a pirate's true legacy is not etched in maps or spoken in hushed tones of dread, but gently whispered in recipes that mix citrus with sea spray, called the real currency of calm. The night sails on with gentle, rhythmic rocking, guiding our band of misfits towards a sweet, citrus-filled slumber, hinting at the next chapter, where perhaps other secrets of the sea lay waiting, tangled in kelp and imagination. It's a dreary, fog-filled morning somewhere off the coast of Tortuga, and our beloved buccaneers are waking up in their pirate haven, a sanctuary of harbors and coves more eccentric than a parrot wearing an eye patch. the sun has barely made its appearance, but that's hardly a concern for pirates, whose favorite navigational tool was often rum. Speaking of which, let's picture this: a place where the sea is as unpredictable as a pirate's allegiance, and the air is thick with tales taller than the ship's masts. You can almost hear the familiar melody of creaking wood mingling with squawking seagulls, a symphony orchestrated by the whims of the Caribbean breeze. As our bearded friends rouse from their hammocks, each one less stable looking than a deckhand after 3 rounds of Blackbeard's favorite brew, they're met with the challenge of preparing for another day on the high seas. Ah, the pirate's breakfast, a hearty menu of hardtack and hopes, swilled down with a sip of watered-down grog. Hardly comparable to a continental buffet, but enzymes aside, scurvy was considered more of a mild inconvenience than anything worth worrying over. The day begins with the kind of raucous laughter and banter that could only be born from a marauding lifestyle. Picture a brotherhood bonded by a mutual affection for treasure maps, wooden legs, and the occasional bout of mutiny, with the sun now casting long shadows across the restless waves. Eventually, turning the sea into sparkling emeralds, the pirates get on with their daily business, planning their next plunder. The captain, a wise and weathered soul with a beard long enough to hide several dubious objects, unfurls a map upon a makeshift barrel table. It's not your average map, more like an unusually vexing jigsaw puzzle with scribbled notes in the margins about cursed islands and the best spots for a cheeky mid-afternoon nap. Now, let's pause briefly to admire the pirate attire. The unofficial dress code consists of whatever mismatched fashion choices one can procure at high seas. Tattered frock coats, flamboyant sashes, and tricorn hats perched askew, giving them the appearance of eccentric artists rather than fearsome sea dogs. A pirate's wardrobe is as eclectic as the adventures that fill their days. Today's agenda, sketched in the most elegantly laid-back pirate style, involves intercepting a Spanish galleon rumored to have as much gold on board as a small kingdom. See, of course, whether or not this galleon exists, or if it gleams with anything more valuable than a collection of dusty old wigs, is another matter entirely. Pirates, you see, are optimistic sort, driven by the possibility of finding their own gleaming El Dorado over the horizon. As our seasoned mariners set sail, the ship's prow cutting through the pristine turquoise, you can almost feel the gentle rocking of the sea, as if the ocean itself is lulled into a genteel slumber. The sails, billowing like majestic wings, catch the wind as if drawn by an invisible siren's call. They venture forward with eyes wide open and minds set on their golden, possibly mythical prize. In the midday sun, under the agreeable skies adorned with fluffy clouds, the atmosphere aboard becomes a mix of industry and leisure. Singing shanties that weave stories of old escapades with poetic flair, the crew finds comfort in their melody. Also vital, of course, is the never-ending maintenance of the ship. Cleaning barnacles off the hull isn't a glamorous job, yet it plays a gentle, repetitive rhythm perfect for hypnotizing our rowdy adventurers into that infamous seafaring tranquility. As the golden hues of sunset approach, casting a mellow glow over the horizon, the day's labors come to a pause. The ship drifts slightly, like a contented cat stretching out in the last halo of warmth. Our pirates, tired yet satisfied, gather round, recounting their latest exploits while swapping exaggerated accounts of the supposed galleon and its phantom gold. And so, under the canopy of stars, with the ship cradled by the endless lull of the sea, the crew settles. The promise of tomorrow, sparkling with unassumed treasures and unpredictable tides, lingers like a sweet memory of dreams yet to be dreamt. And as the night deepens, let us leave them there, on the whispering waves, poised to dive deeper into their wild and charming journey, waiting for the unfolding promise of dawn. Imagine yourself swaying gently aboard a grand wooden ship as it glides over the moonlit waves of the Caribbean Sea. The stars overhead twinkle like distant lanterns in the vast nighttime sky, casting a soft glow upon the water's surface. You find yourself among a crew of eccentric, yet surprisingly endearing pirates, all warmly bundled up in tails spun even tighter than their own ropes. Tales, mind you, as fantastical as the notion of mermaids stopping by for a cup of grog. You see, the life of a pirate was one of great contradictions. On the one hand, they were the unruly rascals of the high seas, roaming with an air of lawlessness that would make even the most notorious of cats blush in admiration. Yet on the other hand, there was a kind of order to their chaos, a nautical ballet choreographed to perfection despite, or perhaps because of, its oddities. For a start, elections were a most peculiar tradition among our salty brethren. Unlike most electorate gatherings, which are often synonymous with stiff suits and cold coffee, pirate captain elections were lively affairs, echoing with cheers, shanties, and sometimes the not-so-subtle clink of dice. The captain, the helmsman steering this ship of misfits, was chosen by popular vote. This democratic approach, an odd spectacle amidst their otherwise anarchic ways, somehow made sense. Once the vote was cast, a process not entirely devoid of bribery by way of ale and promises of plunder, the newly appointed captain took on the task of maintaining a delicate harmony among the cutthroats and scallywags. Pirates, it turns out, have a somewhat sophisticated interpretation of equality. They operated under their own set of rules, known fondly as the Articles of Agreement. These articles were signed by all and dictated the distribution of loot, the punishment for insubordination, and even parameters around working hours. A benefits package, if you will, though dental was regrettably limited to the wielding of pliers. Now, contrary to the tales painted of raucous revelry and endless debauchery, pirates held a peculiar brand of camaraderie, akin to that of a close-knit, albeit rugged family. A pirate's health was collectively tended to, for an injured mate could not handle sword or sail effectively. Superstitions ran deep within their culture, and having a feline companion on board was reputed to bring good fortune. These cats, when not busy securing the ship from rats, provided great comfort, their soft purrs harmonizing with the lulling rhythm of the sea, a fuzzy anomaly in an otherwise perilous existence. But not all was mirth or merriment. There was the occasional skirmish, a dangerous dance with enemy ships, where cannons roared and steel clashed. Yet, in the aftermath, when the smoke cleared and the silence returned, even enemies sometimes became friends over a shared barrel of rum and moonlit horizon. Our seafaring story would be remiss without mention of the peculiarities of pirate economics. The notion of a retirement plan was embodied by the legendary pirate haven of Nassau, a sanctuary where pirates could, in theory, hang up their hats and settle into the tranquil life of retired corsairs. Alas, this paradise was more idyllic in theory than practice, as many found the call of the sea much too enticing to ignore for long, returning to their adventures with the gleam of treasure still in their eyes. As our chapter draws to a close, the whispering winds carry you forward with playful ease, hinting at what's just beyond the next sunbeam on the horizon. Recline further into your comfy berth, guided by the promise that sleep will take you gently forward into whatever awaits beyond the waves. As the moon cast its gentle glow over the Caribbean Sea, the world seemed to settle into a tranquil dance of calm waves and whispered stories. The infamous yet oddly heartwarming community of pirates who once ruled these waters now drifted into the cozy embrace of their own myths and legends. These sea rogues, who lived by the seafaring codes and colourful scarves, have long since claimed their place amongst the stars, or at least amongst the barnacles beneath them. Imagine, if you will, a pirate's last chase, which wasn't the foolish pursuit of a British frigate, but rather the idyllic pursuit of the perfect hammock sway. Picture our favourite buccaneer, Captain Snugglebeard, as he nestled into the worn-out hammock, slung comfortably between two sturdy masts, rocking gently with the ebb and flow of his final league on this curious ocean voyage called life. You see, Captain Snugglebeard had discovered the ultimate treasure of all, a retirement plan that involved coconuts and sun-baked naps rather than gold doubloons and grappling hooks. The Golden Age of Piracy, with its flamboyantly dressed misfits and raucous sea shanties, was much like a coconut cream pie, rich, unpredictable, and occasionally tossed about during a disagreement at sea. But by the end of it, pirates like Snugglebeard knew that true solace was found not amidst stolen cargo, but rather in the quiet corner of an uncharted island where the parrots dictated laws and the only currency was the blissful silence of a setting sun. Life aboard a pirate ship, once rife with daring escapades and the endless quest for hidden booty, had, in its twilight, transformed into something more reflective. The decks that once creaked under the haste of 100 cannonball runs now sighed contentedly under the modest weight of evening gatherings, where tales of mermaids and tempestuous storms were exchanged amidst lazy circles of pipe smoke. Tales spun from the finest yarns, mind you, tales so riveting that you'd fall asleep halfway through, but wouldn't dare interrupt the bard to tell him so. With no urgent letter of marque or an impending fleet of nemesis ships in hot pursuit, the retired pirate's day unfurled with the rhythm of a tropical breeze. Morning sunrises, which once signaled the time to lift, anchor, and set course to wild adventures, now heralded the simple joys of snorkeling amidst curious schools of fish or debating the existential plight of landlocked lobsters with an old shipmate. The community of former pirates, once comrades and sometimes misunderstood seawolves, found peace in their own eccentric way of nostalgia and fellowship. They dined on fresh mangoes, expertly balancing the sticky juice with philosophical discussions on why the rum had always insisted on being gone. Of course, seafaring stories only grew taller, so tall that eventually they might just reach the moon itself, which, according to the tipsy old quartermaster, could only be landed upon if you pledged allegiance with a sailor's wink and a salute. This merry band, having sailed beyond the tangible shores of piracy's golden age, drifted into the afterglow, a place seasoned with laughter echoing across sandy shores and mistaking big fishtails for the actual calling of Poseidon. Perhaps it wasn't the hoarding of treasures that fulfilled the heart of a true pirate, but instead the simple comfort of knowing that their legacy rested on a tide of timeless stories and the odd bottle of aged grog. Our sleepless voyager, Captain Snugglebeard, while dozing off into the gentle hum of beachside slumber, reflects on the countless lessons the sea taught him, not through maps or chronicles, but in quiet moments shared amongst comrades and the singing warm wind during a lazy coconut afternoon. The ocean, in all her majesty and mischief, had always held a special place for wayward souls, like a mother ever patient, ever knowing. With a final, satisfied yawn, the whispers of moonlit waves and the serene sky cradle every past jest, every sail raised to the wind, drawing us ever closer to sleep. As the stars twinkle playfully above the calm of the Caribbean night, we tuck these tales into the quiet corners of our minds, where adventures continue to softly lull us into dreams. Good night. Fellow travelers, may your dreams be filled with calm seas and joyous tales, forever charted in the starry depths of our own dreaming skies.